The morning light bled through the airport windows, washing the terminal in that pale gold glow that made everything look gentler than it was. Flight 273 to Nevada boarded without much fuss. Families, businessmen, tired travelers clutching paper cups of coffee. Amid the chatter and boarding calls, a woman in a faded denim jacket slipped into seat 7F. Her hair was tied back in a low ponytail, her uniform from a roadside diner still faintly smelling of brewed coffee and fried eggs. Her name tag read Maya. To anyone watching, she looked like an overworked waitress taking a long overdue break. She smiled politely at the couple beside her, then turned toward the window. Outside, the tarmac shimmered with heat even at 7 a.m. She loved that smell, the mix of jet fuel and morning air. It stirred something deep inside, something she had tried to bury. When the engines roared to life, the vibration under her feet felt achingly familiar. Her fingers twitched, as though they still belonged on a control stick instead of a coffee pot. As passengers buckled in, 2 uniformed Air Force pilots took their seats across the aisle. They were young, confident, still carrying the kind of pride that came before experience softened the edges. They spoke in shorthand, their voices low but clear enough for Maya to catch words she hadn't heard in years. Red flag, thrust vector, combat radius. She told herself not to listen, but her brain, trained by muscle memory and thousands of flight hours, picked up every syllable like radar. She sipped her coffee to steady herself, but the mug trembled slightly in her hands. "Stop it," she told herself. "You're just a waitress now. You don't fly anymore." Yet her heart betrayed her, skipping with every mention of maneuvers and airspace codes. When the younger pilot chuckled about the legend of Falcon Squadron, Maya's grip tightened. The name hit her like a missile to the chest. She'd heard it whispered years ago, painted on aircraft hulls, called over radios in the chaos of battle. Falcon 1, clear to engage, her call sign, her life. The plane taxied slowly toward the runway. Maya closed her eyes as the captain's voice came over the speakers. Flight 273, clear for takeoff. The engines surged, pressing her back against the seat as the world outside blurred into speed. That familiar force of acceleration filled her veins with an old, dangerous thrill. For a second, she wasn't a waitress on a commercial jet. She was back in her F-16, screaming over desert canyons. The sky split wide open before her. But then the memory darkened. A flash. A wingman's voice cut off mid-sentence. Smoke. Silence. She forced her eyes open, dragging herself back to reality. The hum of the cabin replaced the roar of combat. She exhaled slowly, her knuckles white around her cup. "Ma'am, you okay?" the flight attendant asked kindly. Maya nodded, offering a faint smile. "Just not a fan of flying." The irony burned in her throat. As the aircraft climbed higher, the pilots across the aisle continued their casual talk. Fuel efficiency, new avionics, mission simulations. They had no idea who sat a few feet away from them. No idea that the quiet woman watching clouds pass below had once trained men like them. No idea she'd flown missions so classified they were erased from official records. When the plane leveled off, one pilot caught her gaze and smiled. "You headed to Vegas too?" "Yeah," she said softly, "just revisiting old ground." He chuckled. "Well, good thing we're not flying today. I've had enough turbulence for one lifetime." Maya forced a laugh. "Same." But inside, her pulse refused to settle. Every vibration of the aircraft, every tone of the intercom, every subtle shift in pitch, it all spoke a language she thought she'd forgotten but still understood perfectly. Outside, sunlight glinted off the wings. In that reflection, she caught her own eyes calm on the surface, storming underneath. Somewhere deep inside, the pilot she'd once been stirred awake. And as the flight steadied, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the sky wasn't done with her yet. Something was coming. Something that would make the world remember the name Falcon 1. The plane lurched again, sharper this time, throwing passengers forward. Coffee spilled, overhead bins rattled, and gasps filled the cabin. A young boy clutched his mother's arm, eyes wide. The flight attendants scrambled, their faces pale, trying to soothe panicked passengers. Maya remained seated for a heartbeat, analyzing, calculating. This wasn't ordinary turbulence. She knew the subtle variations in vibration, the uneven hum of the engines. Her gut twisted. Something was wrong, and it required immediate action. "Ma'am, you need to stay in your seat," one flight attendant shouted, reaching toward her. Maya ignored the plea. Her seatbelt was undone before anyone could stop her, and she was on her feet, moving swiftly toward the cockpit. Every step echoed the rhythm of countless takeoffs and landings from her past life. She ignored the murmurs, the wide-eyed stares, the nervous clutching of hands. She was in a cockpit again, if only for a moment, and instinct ruled over fear. Across the aisle, the two F-22 pilots looked at her in disbelief. "Wait, what is she doing?" one whispered almost to himself. "I don't know," said the other, eyes tracking her fast stride. But there was something in her movement, something commanding. They had both been trained to recognize authority and confidence in high-stress airspace. They could see it now. It radiated from her in every step, every measured breath. The cockpit door loomed ahead, the warning lights flickering through the small window. Maya's fingers brushed the handle, her knuckles white but her touch sure. "Stop!" the captain's voice rang sharply. "You cannot enter the cockpit." But Maya paused only briefly, turning to him with eyes like flint. "Listen," she said, her voice calm, firm, unwavering. "You're losing secondary thrust balance. Cut the auxiliary feed and stabilize the pitch immediately. We don't have time for hesitation." The words were technical, precise, spoken with a cadence that left no room for argument. The captain froze, shock painting his features. His eyes darted toward the F-22 pilots behind her. They were silent, stunned. One of them whispered under his breath, "Falcon." The other's jaw dropped. The name carried weight, legacy, a story that had been whispered in hangars and classrooms, a hero long thought gone. "Falcon," the captain repeated, voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Maya said, her gaze unwavering. "Falcon, 187th Fighter Wing. I can help you land this aircraft safely." There was no arrogance, no ego, just competence born from years of experience in the cockpit under conditions most people couldn't imagine. The cabin fell into an uneasy hush, the tension thick enough to choke on. Passengers watched in confusion and fear, unaware of the identity of the woman who now commanded their lives in a way no commercial pilot could. Maya slipped on the spare headset, her movements fluid, almost instinctive. The smell of smoke from the failing right engine filled the cockpit. Warning lights pulsed a frantic red. The captain swallowed hard, silently deferring. "Do what you can," he said, voice tight. Her hands moved across switches, toggling systems, redirecting power, balancing hydraulics. The F-22 pilots peered over her shoulder, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. "She's doing it. She's really doing it." Outside, the plane trembled, the wings groaning under stress. Passengers clutched each other, wide-eyed, sensing danger without knowing why. The flight attendants, now frozen, realized the woman they had dismissed as a simple diner waitress was orchestrating a life-or-death ballet. Every switch flipped, every command spoken, every calculation executed with precision. The chaos of the cabin contrasted sharply with the control she radiated. Over the radio, the distant voice of air traffic control crackled, tentative. "Flight 273, do you read? What's your status?" Maya's eyes narrowed, scanning instruments. Her voice, calm and commanding, cut through static. "Control, this is Falcon. Engine 2 is failing. We've lost auxiliary thrust. Descending at 300 feet per minute. Advise runway 28 for emergency landing. Prepare emergency response teams." A stunned silence followed. The pilots across the aisle exchanged glances, comprehension dawning. "She's Falcon," one breathed. The other nodded, whispering, "The Falcon who walked away from the Air Force, she's back." And in that cockpit, with alarms screaming, engines faltering, and hundreds of lives in her hands, Maya knew one thing: she had never truly left the skis. The cockpit smelled of burnt circuits and fear. Smoke curled faintly from the right panel, acrid and sharp, mixing with the faint scent of coffee lingering from the cabin. Warning lights blinked madly, a symphony of danger that would have frozen most pilots. But not Maya. She slid into the co-pilot's seat, her hands moving with the precision of muscle memory decades deep. Every lever, every dial, every subtle vibration. The plane was speaking, and she understood fluently. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she scanned instruments, instincts kicking in with a force that no passenger could comprehend. The captain swallowed hard, uncertainty written across his face. I don't even know if you can," he stopped. Maya's eyes met his, sharp and commanding. "Captain," she said, voice low and calm, "you don't have to know, I do, just follow my lead." There was no room for argument, only trust. He nodded, swallowing another wave of disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," he said, finally surrendering the cockpit to someone who clearly knew what she was doing. Outside, the plane pitched slightly as the damaged engine struggled. Maya's hands danced across controls, stabilizing the yaw and adjusting thrust distribution. She toggled the auxiliary systems, listening to the subtle hum, feeling every vibration like a pulse. She spoke quietly into the headset, issuing crisp commands. "Stabilize pitch at -3 degrees. Trim rudder to 5. Reduce thrust on engine 2 by 10%. Hold. Balance primary hydraulics. Check." The cockpit fell into a rhythm, the chaos outside contained in the calm authority radiating from her. The F-22 pilots from the aisle leaned in, their eyes wide. "I've heard the stories," one whispered. "But this is insane." The other nodded, gripping the armrest. "She's controlling a passenger jet better than most commercial pilots could dream of." Their admiration was silent, unspoken, but present in every glance and shallow breath. They could only watch as a legend, a ghost from their own military history, guided them through disaster. Maya's mind raced, cataloging every factor: fuel imbalance, weight distribution, passenger panic, altitude, wind speed. The plane was alive like a wild horse she had once tamed. She hadn't flown a commercial jet before, yet the principles were the same. Physics didn't change just because the fuselage was bigger. Every command she gave was precise, calculated, deliberate. She adjusted, recalculated, and adjusted again. The engines roared differently with each tweak, but slowly they began to stabilize. The passengers, unaware of who held their lives in her hands, felt the tension ease slightly. The screams faded. The crying child tucked into his mother's shoulder. Flight attendants watched, incredulous, as the woman they assumed was a nervous diner waitress orchestrated a ballet of survival. Her calm radiated through the cabin like a shield. Over the radio, the distant voice of the control tower crackled. "Flight 273, are you stable?" Maya responded, her tone calm but authoritative. "Control, this is Falcon. Engines are stabilizing. Descent rate reduced. Estimated runway 28 in 3 minutes. Emergency response teams should prepare. All systems nominal under manual override. Repeat, manual override in effect." The pilots beside her exchanged a glance of astonishment. The words, the voice, the precision. It was her. Falcon 1. The woman they had only heard about in legend was not only alive but commanding a commercial aircraft through a near catastrophe as if it were second nature. The plane leveled slightly, wings steady despite the uneven thrust. Smoke was faint now. Maya exhaled slowly, forcing herself to focus entirely on the runway ahead. Every eye in the cabin was on her, whether they realized it or not. Every life depended on her, and she knew it. In that moment, she wasn't a waitress. She wasn't a civilian. She was Falcon, soaring again, the sky reclaiming what had always been hers. And as Nevada stretched below, jagged mountains and desert canyons shimmering in the morning sun, Maya whispered to herself, almost as a prayer, "Let's get home safely." Plane shuddered violently as altitude slipped, smoke curling faintly from the damaged engine. Warnings blared, filling the cockpit with urgent metallic cries. Passengers gripped seats, some praying, others frozen in disbelief. Maya's heart raced, but fear did not control her. Her hands were steady on the controls, her mind slicing through chaos with surgical precision. Every movement calculated, every adjustment precise. She had done worse under far more dangerous skis, and she would do it again. "Trim rudder 5 degrees. Reduce thrust on engine 2. Stabilize pitch at -2, she instructed, her voice a calm anchor in a storm. The first officer obeyed, fumbling slightly but quickly regaining rhythm under her unwavering guidance. Outside, the jagged Nevada landscape rushed up with terrifying speed. The mountains seemed closer than they should have been, the desert floor a mosaic of heat and shadow. Across the aisle, the two F-22 pilots leaned forward, their faces pale. "I've never seen anyone control a commercial jet like this," one muttered, voice trembling. The other nodded, gripping the armrest as sweat beaded on his forehead. They had trained for emergency intercepts, dogfights, and combat maneuvers, but nothing had prepared them for this. "She's not just controlling the aircraft, she's commanding it." Maya's eyes flicked to the instruments, then to the runway now faintly visible below. Every second mattered. Every decision carried weight, hundreds of lives balanced on her judgment. She adjusted the throttle carefully, feeling the engines respond as though she could coax them into obedience. Outside, the wing dipped slightly, and she countered immediately, subtle corrections keeping the aircraft from spiraling into disaster. The passengers murmured nervously, unsure what exactly was happening. Flight attendants, frozen in awe, glanced at each other, then toward Maya. The woman they had seen serving coffee minutes ago was now orchestrating survival. One young mother whispered to her child, "She knows what she's doing, just trust her." And indeed, trust was the only currency that mattered now. Over the radio, one of the F-22 escorts spoke. "Falcon, you're holding it together out there. ETA runway." Maya's fingers danced across the controls, her voice calm but decisive. 3 minutes to touchdown. Maintain heading 28. Brace positions advised. Emergency response teams ready. Outside, the jets flanked them, wings slicing through the sky, a protective shield guiding them home. The roar of their engines mingled with the struggling hum of the damaged plane. Time stretched, each second heavy and eternal. Maya's gaze swept over the cabin, faces pale, eyes wide, hearts racing. She offered no reassurance with words. Her calm authority spoke louder than any sentence could. She was in control. She was Falcon. Memories of her old life surfaced, the Utah mission, the dogfights, the wingman she had lost. Pain, guilt, and regret mingled with determination. She wouldn't let anyone else die. Not today. The plane began its descent, wings level, but the right engine sputtered dangerously. Maya countered immediately, redistributing weight, adjusting rudder and pitch with surgical precision. Each correction a heartbeat, each heartbeat a promise. The F-22 pilot stayed beside them, scanning, offering guidance, but never interfering. This was her flight, her command. The desert below stretched endlessly, but the runway remained a small ribbon of hope. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, but her mind was razor-sharp. "Steady, steady," she muttered under her breath, eyes locked on the strip ahead. The wind kicked dust across the runway, smoke curling from distant fires, but she saw it clearly, calculating distance, descent, and speed. The passengers leaned forward instinctively, some gripping armrests, others clutching loved ones. Every second brought them closer to survival or disaster. And as the first signs of the runway approached, Maya whispered quietly, almost to herself, "Hold together, old girl, one more glide." She had survived worse. She would survive this. The runway appeared below like a sliver of salvation. The jet groaned under the uneven thrust, smoke curling from the struggling right engine. Every fiber of the plane seemed to resist the touch of gravity, threatening to pitch or yaw at any moment. Maya's fingers danced across the controls, subtle corrections flowing instinctively. Her eyes scanned instruments, calculating speed, wind, and descent with precision only a seasoned fighter pilot could possess. The passengers clutched seats, silent with fear, unaware of the woman guiding them through this symphony of chaos. "Prepare for landing. Brace positions," Maya instructed over the intercom, her voice calm but commanding. A hush fell over the cabin. The crew scrambled to check, secure loose items, and instruct passengers. Mothers whispered reassurance to children, some gripping stuffed animals. The tension was palpable. Every person aboard understood that their lives were balanced on the edge of a razor. The captain sat back, awestruck, hands hovering uselessly over the controls. You're going to do this?" he asked, voice trembling. Maya didn't reply. She never needed to. The actions, the calculations, the rhythm of her movements spoke louder than any words. She adjusted rudder and trim, countering the slight pull of the failing engine. Sparks flew faintly as metal stressed against resistance, but the plane held. Outside, the F-22 escorts flanked them, their wings slicing through air like protective sentinels. "Falcon, runway clear, but you'll have minimal margin," one pilot called over the comms. Maya's jaw tightened. Minimal margin, perfect. Enough for a controlled landing if executed precisely, not enough for error. Her pulse accelerated, but her hands remained steady, her mind sharp. Years of training compressed into one moment of decision. The jet descended nose level, wings slightly tilted to counter the asymmetry. The tires brushed the tarmac with a jolt. Sparks flared along the undercarriage, metal screaming in protest. Inside, passengers screamed, held breaths, and some silently prayed. Maya countered the drift, adjusting flaps and rudder, slowing the descent meticulously. Each second stretched into eternity. Every correction could mean survival or disaster. Hold it," she muttered under her breath, focusing entirely on the runway. The captain leaned forward, eyes wide. "She's doing it, she's really doing it," he whispered. The jet touched down fully, screeching, tires smoking. Sparks flew as the fuselage ground against the runway, yet it remained intact. Maya countered again, keeping the plane straight, throttling just enough to stabilize. Passengers erupted in nervous cheers and gasps, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. Flight attendants stared, slack-jawed, realizing that the quiet woman who had served them coffee minutes ago had just executed a near-miraculous landing. Maya's knuckles were white, her hands trembling as she slowly brought the jet to a full stop. She exhaled, a shaky breath that felt like liberation. The runway lights flickered, emergency vehicles approached, and firefighters rushed forward, ready for the worst. But it was over. The plane was intact, the passengers safe, the crew alive. Maya leaned back in her seat, exhausted, heart still hammering. She removed the headset and allowed herself a brief smile, finally letting the adrenaline ebb. The captain turned to her, eyes wide with awe. You just saved this entire flight," he said quietly, still catching his breath. Maya's lips curled in a faint smile. "Used to be my job," she replied, her voice soft. Outside, the F-22 pilots touched down moments later, one nodding toward her cockpit. "Falcon, legend," he said. The words hung in the air as if confirming what everyone already felt. Maya gazed out the window at the desert below. The sun reflected off the tarmac, illuminating the wings of the plane like a halo. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel pride, not for glory, not for recognition, but for survival. Hundreds of lives were safe because she remembered what it meant to soar. The sky had called her back, and she had answered. Hours after the jet came to a grinding stop, the desert air was thick with smoke, dust, and the roar of engines from the emergency vehicles that swarmed the runway. Passengers were ushered to safety, their faces pale, still shaking, whispering gratitude. Some hugged strangers, others silently wept, unable to articulate the terror they had survived. But amidst the chaos, Maya quietly stepped out of the cockpit, exhausted, her denim jacket streaked with soot and ash, her hair damp with sweat. The world didn't know yet that the woman who had served coffee minutes ago had become a legend. Two F-22 pilots lingered near the edge of the tarmac, their uniforms marked with soot from their own flights. They had escorted the damaged plane safely, but now they waiting for a moment that could hardly be captured in words. One stepped forward, holding something in his hand. It was small, unassuming, but it carried weight beyond measure. A squadron patch, blue and gold, with a Falcon mid-dive embroidered across it. "She's still here," one whispered, voice almost trembling. The other nodded, eyes locked on Maya. He spoke, his voice catching slightly. "We thought you were gone after Utah." Maya's chest tightened. That mission, the one she had lost her wingman in, had haunted her for years. She had walked away from the Air Force, from flying, from everything. She had buried her identity deep beneath aprons and coffee cups. But the sky had found her again, and the memories had resurfaced with a vengeance. She took the patch in her hand, feeling the texture, the weight, the significance. It wasn't just cloth, it was a symbol, a reminder that her past had never truly left her. "I was gone," she admitted softly, eyes downcast. "I thought I had lost everything, but today I realize some things can't be buried. They wait and they come back when needed most." Hawk, her former flight lead, stepped closer. He studied her, sober and respectful. "You've walked back into the sky," he said simply, "and you saved lives that had no idea what was coming." Maya's lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. "I didn't do it for glory. I did it because I had to, because I couldn't do anything else knowing the stakes." The F-22 pilots exchanged glances, understanding in silence. They had fought alongside legends before, trained under the same rigorous codes, but nothing compared to witnessing one return from obscurity and reclaim mastery in an instant. The world might never know her name, might never print her story in newspapers, but they did. They had seen it. They had watched Falcon rise from a forgotten past and guide a crippled aircraft to safety. The desert wind kicked dust around their feet, rustling the edges of uniforms and jackets. Maya pinned the patch to her denim, hands slightly trembling. She didn't speak, words felt unnecessary. The sky had spoken through her actions. The crew, passengers, and even the pilots who had flown alongside her once recognized what they had witnessed, a miracle born of discipline, skill, and heart. A small crowd of bystanders began to gather, murmuring about the miracle flight they had just survived. Reporters clicked cameras, taking photos of the aircraft and the emergency crews. But Maya walked quietly toward the edge of the tarmac, away from attention. She didn't need praise. She didn't need headlines. All she needed was the quiet understanding that she had answered a call she thought she had left behind. Hawk's voice followed her softly, filled with admiration and respect. "The sky never lets go of its own." Maya paused, glancing over her shoulder. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in years she felt a sense of belonging, of purpose, of recognition, not for what she had done but for who she was. Falcon had returned. The legend wasn't just remembered, it was alive, breathing in the desert air, ready for whatever the sky demanded next. She took a deep breath, letting the wind carry away the last traces of fear. The patch shimmered faintly in the sun, a reminder that some identities, some legacies, never die. They just wait for the right moment to soar again. Weeks after Flight 273's miraculous landing, the story had spread quietly among aviation circles and social media whispers. News outlets ran headlines like "The Miracle Flight" and "Passenger Saves Plane," but few knew the full truth. Among the passengers and the pilots, a legend had already been written in hushed awe. The woman in seat 7F, the quiet waitress, the hero who had transformed a commercial disaster into a perfect landing. She had walked into a cockpit like a ghost from the past, returning to the sky in a moment that would be remembered by all who witnessed it. Maya returned to her small diner near Air Force Base, apron tied loosely around her waist, the smell of fresh coffee and bacon filling the air. Customers glanced at her with curiosity, unaware of the storm she had survived and the lives she had saved. She served eggs and toast, poured coffee, and smiled politely at regulars, all the while carrying the weight of the past few weeks in quiet reflection. The patch from the 187th Fighter Wing was pinned discreetly to her apron, a reminder of the day she reclaimed a part of herself. One afternoon, a young cadet entered the diner, eyes wide as he spotted the Falcon patch gleaming faintly in the sunlight. "Excuse me, are you Falcon?" he asked, voice trembling with awe. Maya paused, wiping a counter, then smiled softly, offering him a cup of coffee. "Once," she said, voice gentle but firm. "Flying isn't about the jet, it's about heart." The cadet's jaw dropped, admiration bright in his eyes. He nodded solemnly. "I'm joining flight school next year. I want to be like you." Her gaze drifted toward the open windows, watching the desert sunlight dance across the horizon. She thought of the cockpit, the roar of the engines, the adrenaline that had surged through her veins. It had been terrifying. It had been exhilarating. And it had reminded her of a truth she had buried long ago. The sky doesn't forgive hesitation, but it rewards those who answer its call. She had walked away once, but now she knew some parts of herself could never truly be left behind. The F-22 pilots who had escorted Flight 273 returned a few days later, standing outside the diner quietly, hats removed. Hawk, her former flight lead, stepped forward and handed her a small commemorative plaque from the squadron, engraved simply, "Falcon 1 Legendary Recovery, Flight 273. Maya accepted it silently, touched but humble. She didn't need accolades. The gratitude in their eyes, the respect was enough. For the first time in years, she felt both home and sky in the same moment. Patrons watched the quiet exchange, unaware of its significance, seeing only a small, unassuming diner. But those who had been airborne in the sky that day or had studied Falcon Squadron understood. Legends weren't always loud. Sometimes they were quiet, unassuming, serving coffee while holding entire lives in their hands. Sometimes they sat in seat 7F, waiting for the sky to call again. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the desert in crimson and gold, Maya stepped outside for a breath of wind. The F-22s she had flown with years ago were back, distant but unmistakable, soaring across the horizon. Her pulse quickened, a smile tugging at her lips. Perhaps the sky wasn't done with her yet. Perhaps there were still calls to answer, missions to reclaim, wings to spread. For now, though, she stood in the warm desert air, coffee cup in hand, apron streaked with syrup and sweat, a legend hidden in plain sight. The patrons inside laughed and chatted, oblivious to history in the making. But those who had been on Flight 273 would never forget. Seat 7F, the quiet waitress, the pilot known only as Falcon, she had returned, and the world would remember her courage forever. The wind whispered across the desert, stirring the patch on her apron. It was a reminder, legends never die. They just wait for the right moment to soar again.